I'm tired.
The Late Morning Program with Nam Ras Podcast.
Hare Krishna, everyone. You are listening to the Late Morning Program, the #1 Hare Krishna podcast in the world. I'm your host, Nam Ras Das. I'm here with His Holiness B.V. Tripurari Maharaj. Maharaj, you're on for a second time. I'm really excited to speak to you, and I'm really honored. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. You have a nice program here. It seems quite well received by the community and varied. So
thank you so much.
Appreciate the program and happy to be with you.
Thank you. So Maharaj, just maybe carrying on from last time, we were speaking about different subjects, and now the subject comes up regarding your books and how many books you've written. You were the first to write a Bhagavad Gita commentary after Srila Prabhupada, meaning Srila Prabhupada's disciples. You were the first to do that. So let's probably start out here with why did you start? What inspired you? Why did you start writing books? And did you get any flack for that? Meaning, did you get criticized for writing books after Srila Prabhupada? I mean, I could understand why that could happen, but maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, that does your question does kind of pick up where we left off, because when we spoke last time, you were asking me a little bit about my history and so forth, and I think it culminated in my choice to serve separately from ISKCON, serve Prabhupada separately, and as one of the consequences of that is that I didn't have any books to distribute, because at the time they wouldn't sell me any books, any of Prabhupada's books to sell. So that was the impetus, I think, behind writing books on my part. And I felt that we have to have some books, and so I'll write them. I didn't have any background in writing. I didn't have any education outside of really high school. I'd never written anything but a letter or two. But I'm a pretty good speaker, and I know the material well, and I also, pretty good communicator, understanding how people are thinking and so forth. And at that time, being outside of ISKCON, I turned to what was at the time starting to be called like the New Age community. This was in the mid 1980s.
Right.
And there were a lot of magazines coming out at that time. New Age magazine, Yoga Journal was still in the black, was still in the red at that time. That it hadn't become successful financially speaking. And so I started writing by writing a magazine. We call it Clarion Call. Clarion Call is an old English term, and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur used that phrase to refer to Krishna's final statement in the Gita, Sarva Dharman Pratyajam Mamekam Saranam Braja, and so forth. So I developed a new language and whatnot to speak with that particular community. For me, it was a little bit going back to alternative America, where a lot of us disciples of Prabhupada came from, but divorced ourselves from considerably. And ISKCON tended to kind of minister to more straight America in a lot of ways.
Right.
So in that community, I could exist as a sannyasi and be accepted, so to speak. So I started publishing the magazine, and then one of my friends, I think we did that for a couple of years. It came out quarterly, and it was in all the newsstands around United States and so forth. Actually, members of ISKCON who published the Back to Godhead secretly arranged a meeting with me. I didn't know it was secret, but it was secret as it turned out. They liked some of the things I was doing in the magazine, and they wanted to interview me about it, my insights and so forth. So I did offer them some advice, how I thought it would be good, what direction to go in with Back to Godhead magazine. Yeah. But at any rate, the magazine was very, it was well received, but it took a lot of energy, to be on time, deliveries and the publishing schedule and so on and so forth. And so I shifted from that to writing books. And I began by writing a couple of introductory books. I think the first book I wrote was called Rasa, Love, Relationships, and Transcendence. And it's full of the kind of language, if you will, that I mentioned, vocabulary and so forth, that I developed to address that particular community. And it was a community that was largely ignored at the time by ISKCON, so I didn't want to compete with them, so to speak. And so that's another reason I chose that. And so anyway, eventually I shifted from writing the magazine to writing books. And again, I first started, the books were more intended for the general public, but gradually I shifted or drifted into the direction of writing the books for the devotional community that would also have some be accessible to and inviting to educated, liberal-minded people in the English-speaking language in North America in particular. It frustrated me to see that Buddhism, for example, was such that if you were at some type of a gathering, a social gathering, a party or something like that, and someone mentioned that they had been to a Buddhist retreat, it would be very cool.
Right.
But if you said that you had gone to the Hare Krishna temple, it wouldn't be received in the same way. So that was very frustrating to me to see that, because of how rich the Gaudiya theology is, and how much it picks up, if you will, where something like Buddhism leaves off. If you were to take an American kind of example, to be within materially conditioned life would be in negative numbers. If you were to go from there to Buddhism, you'd come to zero, which is positive in relation to negative numbers, and it's quite a big step in and of itself. And most paths just kind of take a deep breath and leave it at that. But then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked the question, more or less, are there any positive numbers to be considered? And it goes to 108, if you will. So I just felt that there was a way to talk about Gaudiya Vaishnavism in contemporary society amongst educated people that would, whereby they would find it attractive. And at the same time, with that being a focus, again, my focus shifted to speaking through my books to devotees in such a way that they would also start to do that, I hoped, and have a more, maybe a greater sense of what the dialogue is, what's going on out there amongst educated people, how they're thinking about the nature of consciousness, and so on and so forth. Prabhupada wanted us to preach to educated people,
right,
and so on. So my focus in my books turned from introductory books to books that were for devotees and for educated people. I'd say they're more like 70% for devotees and 30% for people who could pick up on it to some extent and then need further guidance to understand some of the terms and so forth. But yeah, a way of talking about deep subjects, the core issues of Gaudiya Vaishnavism in contemporary language, and showing the universality of Gaudiya Vaishnavism's deep concepts.
Right. And how were they received? When you, like, for
Well,
example, you started with Rasa, then in 1993, Ancient Wisdom for Modern Ignorance in 1995, then Tattva Sandarbha in 1995. Then Tattva Sandarbha, that's a whole different thing.
yeah, well, that's the shift that I'm talking about from
Right.
introductory books. Ancient Wisdom for Modern Ignorance was based on articles that had been written for the Clarion Call magazine that I mentioned. Rasa was an original book for myself. But again, those were more introductory. How they received, well, they sold out. They're out of print now. And Tattva Sandarbha is out of print also. My Shikshastakam commentary is almost out of print. Gopal Tapani Upanishad commentary and translation, that's out of print. Bhagavad Gita's been, I think it's in its fourth printing.
Wow.
And these are, I don't, I'm known for selling Prabhupada's books, so being, kind of crude as it was, in a marketing section, rather than in the editorial and publishing section. But having shifted to that latter group, the editing and publishing sector, I haven't really done anything to market my books. I don't have an army of people out selling them and whatnot. So they all sold, in stores and eventually online and so forth.
Yeah.
But Tattva Sandarbha, that's quite a shift, and there's quite an interesting history to that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
Well, I started studying. I studied the Sandarbhas in the early 90s, 1990, 1992, 93, with Satyanarayan Das Babaji, who at that time was a member of ISKCON, was living in the ISKCON Krishna Balaram Mandir's Gurukul and teaching Sanskrit there. And he had been initiated by Jayatirtha Maharaj, or Jayatirtha Prabhu, who was a friend of mine, but had not been able to live up to the expectations that a disciple would have of a guru. And Satyanarayan then got initiated by another person in ISKCON, and that wasn't working out that well either for him, apparently. So he searched around in Vrindavan for a teacher, and he ended up coming under the tutelage of Haridas Shastri. Haridas Shastri was a controversial person in Vrindavan because he didn't look fondly upon the system of Siddha Pranali that was going on at the time, giving out of Siddha Dehas and so forth on the part of gurus, and he was much more conservative. In fact, there are a number of Gaudiya Math disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta who were initiated, like Bhakti Daitya Madhav Maharaj, for example. Two of his leading sannyasis were both sent by Madhav Maharaj to Haridas Shastri to learn different texts and so forth, Sandarbhas, and so on. Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj sent one of his sannyasi disciples to Haridas Shastri also to learn. So he was known as being an objective and very, very learned sadhu and scholar from the Gadadhar Paribar. And so, as I say, Satyanarayan was learning from him, and he was giving classes on the Sandarbhas. And I heard about that because I was spending a lot of time in Vrindavan in those days. So I went and I met him, and I learned the Sandarbhas. This was probably 1993 or 92, something like that, quite some time ago. And that was before, of course, they were published. And in the context of digesting the material of Jiva Goswami at great length, which I relished very much, I mentioned to Satyanarayana, I said, you should write something. You should put this, in print. And he said, no. He kind of went, no. And he was, so I said, maybe I'll do something. So I went and published, wrote a explanation of the Tattva Sandarbha. And apparently he started doing it as well, unbeknownst to me, and he didn't know that I was doing it. And so his came out, his first edition, which he was helped with in English writing by a disciple of Prabhupada named Kundali Das. And so they came out at about the same time, but interestingly, my edition, unbeknownst to me, was sent out in manuscript form by one of my godbrothers. His name is Vichara Das, Canadian devotee, and friend of mine, two different scholars that he had a list of Indologists. And on that list was Jan Brzezinski. And Jan Brzezinski received the manuscript and got in touch with me. His former name was, he's a disciple of Prabhupada, I forget his former name, but he eventually, after having taken sannyas from Bhavananda and that not working out, he went to Lalit Prasad, Bhaktisiddhanta's brother, and he received some mantras from him and the name Jagadananda. And so he was on the list, apparently. And he's a Sanskrit scholar who got his PhD from Oxford many years ago. He did his thesis on Jiva Goswami, Sakya, or Paraki, an old controversy in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So when he got the book, he was very inspired, and he got in touch with me, and then he came out to visit me at my suggestion for a week or so we spent together. And I was able to encourage him to get, back involved in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which he hadn't been for years. He was married, he had a son, living, I think, in Montreal. And just subsequent to that, Narayan Maharaj, not long after that, I guess, came to the Americas for the first time. And we were I was in Oregon at the time, I had an ashram there. We were the only group that invited him to, come and visit. At that time, none of the ISKCON temples would allow him to come. So he came for 3 days and gave talks and so forth and so on. And I talked to him about Jagadananda and his past and so forth. And he encouraged me to encourage him and stay in touch with him. So that was the beginning of a relationship I've had with him. I don't agree with him on everything, but he's quite a good scholar and a good Sanskritist. And now, as it turns out, well, the last few years, he is part of the 3-person team, Satyanarayan, Jagadananda, and Navadvip Das, who are publishing the definitive editions of the Sandarbhas. So my edition had something to do with right. That's going on right now that I think is good for the community. So so it's an interesting, history, and since then I was very inspired by the work of Jiva Goswami, the Sandarbhas, in particular the way he presents the philosophy. Which is a controversial issue at the moment.
Right. I wanted to segue into that. What are your comments on so for those of you who don't know, I did a podcast with Swami Padmanabh Maharaj, who is Tripurari Maharaj's disciple, and we talked about the Bhakti's inherency or not inherent, and then there was a response to that from Sundar Gopal Prabhu regarding that it is inherent, and so there was been back and forth on the comments and devotees going back and forth on that, and I just wanted to know what your comments were, because I guess I haven't heard you speak about it at all, but just briefly, just to talk about that.
Well, someone brought to my attention the podcast that you had with Sundar Gopal. So I listened to that. I was quite underwhelmed, however, as to his presentation and how it held up. And I was a little disappointed at the onset of it as well, which he began his presentation by saying that this controversy, the genesis of it, comes from Ananta Vasudeva, a disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta, who left Bhaktisiddhanta, who was a prominent disciple in the main acharya, if you will, in the Gaudiya Math sector after the passing of Bhaktisiddhanta, who left. And Sundar Gopal said that his main contention was that that Bhaktivinoda Thakur had preached that bhakti was inherent, and that he disagreed with, called it Apasiddhanta. But that's not accurate. The basis of Ananta Vasudeva and Sundarananda Gopal Bhaktisiddhanta, who left because they doubted the lineage of Bhaktisiddhanta, whether it was actually initiated by Gaurkishordas Babaji. There are related issues and so forth, but they never mentioned Bhaktisiddhanta in the 3 books they wrote, and they never mentioned Bhaktivinoda either. So, and in fact, Haberman, the scholar, I forget his first name, forgive me, who actually became a initiated member of the Vallabha Sampradaya, but was introduced to Gaudiya Vaishnavism through Gaudiya Vaishnavism. He wrote a book years ago, Acting as a Way of Salvation, which is about the Gaudiya Vaishnava conception of Raganuga Bhakti. And at the onset of the book, he himself, having interviewed different members of the Gaudiya community outside of ISKCON, stated that there were 2 opinions that he ran into, that bhakti was inherent or that bhakti wasn't inherent. And by inherent, I think that they meant that the swarup, the bhakti swarup, the spiritual form and persona, if you will, that a devotee would attain was preordained or something like that. So the controversy goes beyond Gaudiya Math and whatnot. But yeah, I didn't find Sundar Gopal's ideas very compelling. He seemed to place a lot of emphasis on the rishi from the one branch of the Ramanuja Sampradaya, whom Jiva Goswami mentions and cites, and holds in regard. But I mean, he cites them in the context of his having cited a verse from the Padma Purana. And the rishi has his own verse. The verse from Padma Purana lists the characteristics of the Atma. And the rishi adds a couple of more to them. And Jiva Goswami cites any number of venerable Vaishnavas, but he doesn't ascribe to everything that they teach, which Sundar Gopal seems to think that he should, or he does. Jiva Goswami subscribe to everything that the rishi from the Ramanuja Sampradaya subscribes to, which is seems a little silly. I mean, even the word prema, I mean, obviously the rishi didn't study the Priti Sandarbha, prema, Priti, same thing, hadn't even been written yet. And so what his idea of prema is even in the Ramanuja Sampradaya is very different from the idea in Gaudiya Vaishnavism.
Right.
But besides that, I mean, he put a lot of emphasis on the word Sheshatva, which is one of the qualities of the Atma, which basically means Shesh means remainder, which means that the Jiva is a part and parcel, to use Prabhupada's terminology, of the Paramatma. Comes from the Paramatma, Sheshatva. So to say, as Sundar Gopal did, that Sheshatva equals Dasattva equals Prema is such a stretch that it's not credible. I mean, Jiva Goswami says in the Sandarbha himself, Paramatma Sandarbha, what he means, what his understanding of Sheshatva is in a couple of paragraphs. And he doesn't use the term anywhere in the Priti Sandarbha where Prema or Priti is described, and so on. So, I mean, I could go on. That's a whole other topic.
I'm going to
find the presentation very, very, very compelling.
Right. I'm actually bringing.
I appreciate his way of presenting, if you will.
Sure. Going back to the authorship topic, should one write if they have yet to have a kind of mystic perception of the reality that they're writing about? Like, if one is not fully realized, then what is one even writing about? I think this is kind of this discourages contemporary devotees to be writers, because they feel like, okay, I'm not there yet to kind of like share my ideas yet. What would you say to that?
Well, yeah, there's a couple of things that come to mind. One thing is to beware, because Gaudiya Vaishnavism really, unlike other schools of Vedanta, is not only a being, but also becoming. What I mean by that is that it's thought that, and accurately so, that in the material life, we're all trying to become something. But Vedanta says we're trying to become what we are. We're trying to become pleasured. We're trying to become stable. And we're trying to know Satchitananda. We're trying to be, in a sense, what we are. And rather than trying to become, we're trying to become, I should say, what we are. Rather than trying to become, we should just be. But in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, there is also a transcendental becoming as well. Prem, for example, is said to be full and complete, but ever increasing. How, and there's of course a question, how can something be eternal and have a beginning, or how can there be anything new in that which is eternal? Well, Gaudiya Vaishnavism doesn't answer it logically, but it says that there's every time you see Krishna, this is a symptom of anurag. He looks new. Is he new, or does he just look new? Are there new pastimes? Gopakumar and Brigat Bhagavatamrita enters into Golok, and there's a whole new Leela that surrounds his entrance there. Now you could say it's all there, of course, in potential. All the bhavas are there. Sakya Bhava is there. It's eternal. Madhurya Bhava is there. Vatsalya Bhava. And these are all expressions of the Swarup Shakti, which is continually in an ongoing way representing itself for the pleasure of Krishna, anticipating his desires and so forth. So new persons can come out of an eternally existing bhav, if you will. You ask, does someone have to be there? Well, the very nature of it is that it's ongoing. In transcendence itself, the whole idea of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is that Krishna is trying to understand himself and experience himself in ways that he has not to date, from the vantage point of Radha. So there's a new Leela for that. And you can say that Leela is eternal and so forth, but still there's, the way I look at it is there's an eternal becoming as well. And again, Bhakti, Prem is full, but ever increasing at the same time. So where do you want to start with how experienced someone is before saying anything about what it is that one is involved in, whether it be writing or talking about it. There's not a heck of a lot of difference. I remember once I was sitting with Prabhupada. Prabhupada was, I had heard that Prabhupada was going to cook that day. I was in Vrindavan, so I went down and I was going to help him. And as I got there, he was taking a massage, and I said, Prabhupada, I heard you were going to cook, so I came to help him. He said, no, I'm not cooking today. And then he began to speak. I was a new sannyasi, so he said, I can cook with wood. And he began to speak about the independence of a sannyasi. He meant I could live in the forest, I could collect wood and cook, and I don't need anybody. And he was speaking like that to me. And a brother of mine who was a well-known book distributor and a friend of mine, Gopa Vrindapal, he heard that I was in speaking to Prabhupada, and so he came in, and Prabhupada entertained him, and he made a presentation to Prabhupada, which was that he felt that the preachers on the street who were selling the books should know the script better, and he thought that there should be some documentation of what they should say and what they shouldn't say, so that the teaching wouldn't be misrepresented. But Prabhupada didn't like the idea at all, that they would be scripted. And he said, no. He said, just like our Tripurari Maharaj, and he pointed to me, he said, Kesham satatayuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam dadami buddhi yogam. So Krishna is giving him so many things in the heart to say, and he's saying them. So we cannot regulate the preachers. This is coming from Krishna. They have inspiration, and it's coming from Krishna, and it Prabhupada wanted very much to encourage this kind of independent thinking, independent action in a sense. Also, he wanted his books very, very well edited and so forth. And you could say that's kind of the Abed, non-difference, one philosophy, but it lent itself to a difference in expression. So he wanted all the temples to be independent, and he kind of ran his movement with the idea that, well, they're sincere, they're chanting. They told me they wanted to open a temple in San Francisco. I guess we should go there. Krishna wants to go there. When Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, well, Prabhupada once Prabhupada was talking to him, and Prabhupada wanted him to do something, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, Prabhupada, I might as well go to China. And Prabhupada said, yes, Krishna said you might as well go to China. So Prabhupada was kind of following the hearts of his own disciples, where he thought Krishna was present in their sincerity, and expanding his movement in that way. Experimenting, as he said, giving out the holy name, and let's see what happens. So I'm just speaking, in a broad way in answer to your question, that I think that we don't want to speak or teach in such a way as to really discourage devotees from expressing themselves. Yeah, they may make mistakes and so forth, but they can learn from them also. Mistakes are only as bad as you don't learn from them, right?
Right. Yeah.
And Prabhupada did make statements at times that, only self-realized persons should write and so forth. But he also said quite to the opposite, that your realization will be enhanced by writing, and he encouraged his disciples, to write. So I think it's better to err on that side of encouragement, and than to almost militate that you have to be at a certain level of Krishna consciousness in order to write. And who's going to determine what level you're at?
Right.
You can say, for example, you can't write the Bhagavad Gita commentary. But if you want to use Prabhupada's logic, really the reply would be, you cannot, but you cannot say I cannot. You cannot, but you cannot say I cannot. And so, yeah, I did get some flack for writing a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, and it's an example of the the kind of thing we're talking about that I think is counterproductive, and you can see it in a number of devotees' books. Those who have written books, oftentimes there's almost an apology for writing the book at the beginning of the book. They probably shouldn't be writing a book if they have to apologize, because everything's in Prabhupada's books, and I'm only maybe writing a bridge book to Prabhupada's books. I mean, in my perspective, Prabhupada's books are bridge books to other books. He quotes, he cites regularly, and if you're interested in the subject more, the implication is go to that book. Yeah, so I would, I did receive a lot of flack from that. It didn't really bother me because I didn't think it had any substance to it, but it was unfortunate. I was, I guess I was a bit of a pioneer in that field, because now there are a number of Prabhupada's disciples that have written commentaries or done translations of the Gita. So in writing the Bhagavad Gita commentary, I took a certain course. I mean, I write my books for reasons, I think it out. With regard to the Gita, my feeling was that by that time I had written the Tattva Sandarbha edition, and I did a book called Aesthetic Vedanta, which is a very, very interesting book. It's a term that I coined in my Tattva Sandarbha edition, Aesthetic Vedanta. So I wrote a book about Vedanta of aesthetics, and I explained the Rasa Panchadhyaya in there, from, among other things, looking at it from the technical vantage point of Rupa Goswami's aesthetics of Bhakti Rasa. So having done that, I thought about the Bhagavad Gita, because I've read Prabhupada's books many times. I think I read the Bhagavatam, all of them, 30 times, volumes of Prabhupada in the Bhagavatam. And I really relished the Bhagavatam. It was always my favorite book. And I felt that I hadn't done justice to the Gita comparatively. I maybe read it 10 times. And there's this nice group of devotees who are like Gita Bhaktas, who feel like everything's in the Gita. And I thought that I'm sure it's valid, the seeds of everything, at least. I look at the Gita, the Bhagavatam is the theological sequel to the Gita, which Prabhupada, the Gita, referred to as the civilization of intelligence, spiritual intelligence, and the Bhagavatam, the civilization of the soul itself, the soul proper. So I was intrigued with the idea of experiencing everything is in the Gita. So I studied the Gita, but that was before. Now the core Gaudiya editions of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Baladev Vidyabhushan are in English. That it was not available at the time. But I studied the Gita, and I studied also their commentaries, and I began to find, to experience everything's in the Gita. And one of the things in their Gitas, those commentaries being, like I say, core Gaudiya commentaries, they do subtly bring out, and in some places directly say, that hear Krishna speaking about, Raga Bhakti, which is a little peculiar for most people. Krishna's in Kurukshetra, speaking to Arjuna about Dharma. This isn't the Braj Leela. But the way I approached it was to give support in contemporary language to those ideas, core ideas, that were found in Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's edition and Baladev Vidyabhushan's editions. And of course, Prabhupada dedicated his edition to Baladev Vidyabhushan at the onset. But anyway, I took the approach that Krishna is standing at Kurukshetra speaking to Arjuna about Dharma. Has he ever been there before? And if so, would that have any impact on what he is saying? And of course, from the Bhagavatam's story, we know, yes, he was at Kurukshetra during the solar eclipse. There he met with the Brajbasis. He had confidential discussion with the gopis. Mai Bhakti Bhutanam Mrtatvaya Kalpate. That's a very core section of the Bhagavatam and the glorification of trumpeting of the virtues of the Brajalila and Brajagopikas in particular. So he was there. Now he's there again with Arjuna. Will that serve as an udipana? He's going to talk about Dharma. How can he, not reflect back? So I looked at it like that, and of course, this way I was able to give some support, I think, to those ideas, especially in the Chatur Shloki of the four essential verses of the Gita that Vishnu Shakti Thakur points out. So, but yeah, I mean, I got some flack for it. As far as realization goes, the more realization you have, the more you're going to be able to add to it. I don't think there's much of a place for just repeating things that have already been said. But if, as a result of reflecting on them, there's something that you have benefited from personally, and you're a devotee, then there's a chance that another devotee will benefit from it as well.
Right.
And I benefited immensely from all the books I've written, but we're talking about the Gita. I had the realization every chapter I thought was the best, and then the next one. And in my particular edition, I try to show how one verse leads to the next, and so forth, and sort of show it more as a conversation, if you will, and make the connection how one chapter logically leads to the next. It's not something that Prabhupada did in his particular commentary. He wrote his commentary in a different way. So those are a couple of the unique aspects of it, and it was very rewarding for me personally. And so, I knew this is good. I mean, I'm a devotee. I've been nourished by this. Other devotees will as well. So that some people don't like it or don't think I should be writing it and so forth. Time will catch up, and
Yeah.
I'm on the right side of history here.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the tension between realizations and representation, because we hear that just repeat what the previous acharyas have said, but then it's the line between realization and speculation is kind of blurred. How do we make that balance, especially for younger people who feel like they could write and say something about Gaudiya Vaishnavism?
Well, I think it's very important to be grounded, very, very well grounded in the teachings, in the core teachings,
Right.
To begin with. And that's a task in itself.
Yeah.
Prabhupada's books are introducing us to an entire lineage and a heritage of literature that's considerable. Many core books and commentaries for hundreds of years of tradition of commentary. He's introducing us to that, and in a bit of a hurried way, also as he travels around the world and so forth. So I think it really behooves one, if they're going to write about Gaudiya Vaishnavism, to understand it and go as deeper into it, which Prabhupada's books are kind of a portal, to. And that in itself is a task. Now, obviously, there are different levels to writing about Gaudiya Vaishnavism, what you want to say, and so forth. But but the theology, how rich it is, how nuanced it is, how it arguably offers the deepest penetration into transcendence while acknowledging other levels of penetration into transcendence in other traditions. It's very, very interesting. And as I was saying earlier, I think it has a lot of potential to capture the minds of people. If you want to talk about consciousness, what's the nature of consciousness? And how it's not, for example, one argument would be our argument, something that's reducible to a brain. But that's just like 101 discussion about consciousness. What is the nature of consciousness? What happens in the realm of consciousness? What possibilities and so forth? So to write about Gaudiya Vaishnavism, I think it really behooves us to understand it better, and your question is about realization versus speculation, and so forth. Well, the word speculation, which was a popular word of Prabhupada's that he invoked, mental speculation, I think is often misunderstood. Mental speculation is different than philosophical conjecture. So Prabhupada, while speaking against what he called mental speculation, simultaneously advocated that what we say should be supported by the text. So I think that you could just say any old thing, make it up as you go along, and that would be, in Prabhupada's vocabulary, mental speculation. Whereas if what you say is supported by the text, then it's not mental speculation. Now, when you start to speak and your speech or writing is represented by the text, there's room there within that, which you can see from reading different authors. There's room for more than one opinion that still falls within the parameters of the tattva, of the siddhanta. There's something called Shastra Yukti. Yukti means reasoning. So reasoning about the implications of the text in time, in circumstances, and just within the text itself. Shastra Yukti is not mental speculation. Yukti, or reasoning that's not grounded in revelation, where you just, and that's the modern society. At a certain point in Western civilization, philosophy was unhinged from theology. In that case, the biblical Western revelation of the Prince of Peace, Jesus of Nazareth, and so forth, and his followers. So when they unhinged philosophy from theology and philosophy unto itself, then you're just there to, for much mental masturbation as you want, to come up with any number of ways of looking at any number of things and so on and so forth. So that's the kind of thing that Prabhupada referred to as mental speculation. Whereas if you reason based on scripture, that kind of philosophical conjecture and so forth, if you can land on your feet in doing so and remain in your presentation within the parameters of what constitutes the philosophy, which then you have to know, then that's desirable. That's not just repeating something then. Now you're thinking this verse says this, it says this over here, these work together like this, and there's another way that it could be looked at and shed new light on it. I mean, that's the whole idea of Guru Parampara. There's sometimes an idea amongst Prabhupada's followers, which I am one, but not in that particular group I'm talking about, where the guru, for example, now should only say up to what Prabhupada said and nothing more. Maybe a little less would be better, and make him or her thereby bona fide. But that's not the teaching. He or she, the guru, should say more. And probably would like nothing more than that, if you will. But the more doesn't change anything. If you were to take a lotus and put some sunshine on it and open it up and open it up more and show more of what's there. And of course, teaching, preaching, writing is also going to obviously take into consideration the time, the circumstance one's in.
What's an example of that more, would you say?
Well, this is one example. Time and circumstance will warrant that what was previously a detail that it was emphasized may be de-emphasized now because it's no longer applicable. Prabhupada was preaching to people who didn't know anything about Gaudiya Vaishnavism or Hinduism even for about 12 years. Well, that Prabhupada left in 1977. I don't know how many years is it now later, 50 years later.
Right.
And there's a lot more information about Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and people are coming to Gaudiya Vaishnavism like yourself, who were born in maybe Gaudiya, I think you or your wife, in Gaudiya Vaishnava families, or you have children now yourself, and so forth. This is different, very different circumstances. So what's going to be taught, what's going to be emphasized within Gaudiya Vaishnavism, arguably are going to be different themes than ones that were emphasized by someone who was breaking ground with new people who had never heard of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So according to the time and circumstance, there's going to be new ways of talking about the teaching. And there may be, if the circumstances mandate it, speaking about other aspects of Gaudiya Vaishnavism that are there, for example, in Prabhupada's book, but weren't emphasized at that particular time. So that's one way in which there's more, and another way, in a more even deeper, more spiritually substantial way, is that the realizations come from practicing Gaudiya Vaishnavism. As Prabhupada said, Dadami Buddha Yogam Tam, Enamam Upayanti Te. Krishna gives insight and new ways of looking at the same verse that still fall within the parameters, of the Siddhanta.
Someone could say that, okay, something that may not have been emphasized previously now can be emphasized, or something that wasn't can be emphasized now. Then it gives room for anything to be, I guess, kind of picked and chosen of what to emphasize and what to not. And it kind of, maybe someone could say, it waters down the teaching, or it changes, or you're kind of, according to your liking, you're just taking the things that the Acharya said, but not emphasizing the things he emphasized. And some people find that to be a problem.
Well, I don't think watering down would apply to someone who's writing a book that's going deeper into core tenets of Gaudiya Vaishnavism.
Right.
Now, if you want to write some pablum for the general public because you feel that Gaudiya Vaishnavism is not popular enough, and therefore you're a little embarrassed to be a member of it, and therefore you want to popularize it, there's a chance you could be watering it down,
right.
and it wouldn't be very palatable, perhaps, and core issues of the philosophy might be compromised. And it's one thing to want to be relative. I think you want to be relative to the time and circumstance, but not at the cost of the core teachings. So that's an art, how to do both. Now, in my books, I'm writing for devotees. I'm trying to take them deeper into their own practice. So it's far from watering it down. And I think that that's what writers in positions like mine, who are sannyasins or learned persons, senior devotees. I mean, I'm 72. I've been a sannyasi for 50 years. So you would hope that someone like me would be able to write a book.
Right.
That devotees would inspire devotees, right?
Yeah.
And so if you were to give this, and let's just an example, give all the sannyasis and senior women, preachers, the task that they have to go to all the temples and speak on certain subjects, like, okay, you're going to go here and do a seminar on Bhagavatamrita, a seminar here on the Sandarbha, a seminar here on the Gita, or something like that, instead of trying to make new people, which is easy for them to do comparatively.
Right.
To speak to a new person about Krishna consciousness is like I do in my sleep, Now, if I'm going to speak to a group of devotees who have been devotees for years, decades even, and not have them fall asleep or get bored or not come because they think, I've heard it all before. I've got to know what I'm talking about. So I have to then go deeper into the philosophy myself in order to be able to do that. So when you approach it like that, it ensures that the writer himself or herself is going deeper into the teaching, digging, mining for jewels to bring out, thinking, taxing their brain how to deal with contemporary currents of philosophy in the world today, and show how Gaudiya Vaishnavism is relevant in relation to them. This is very consuming, so it's very purifying for the preacher. It puts a pressure on the preacher, and it enlivens the constituents, the group, who then in turn can make presentations to the general public. So Prabhupada was preaching really only to the devotees. First he made the devotees, and then he was only preaching to them. We were preaching to everybody else.
Right.
So I think there should be a class of authors that do that. And I don't think that you're going to get a watering down. It doesn't. That the term doesn't apply to that approach.
Fantastic point. I love that. So kind of goes back to Prabhupada's point where he said in a few letters, boil the milk. We have so many followers now. What's the point of increasing when we don't inspire the ones that we already have? So I say that a lot about, I mean, it's not a popular point, but it's
a good point. I should make the point in response that that's exactly what I was told to do by Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj also. He was very brought to tears to see that members of ISKCON were going away. Members who had dedicated themselves were going away because of the way the administration had conducted itself, the leaders, the gurus had conducted themselves. So it was very painful for him. So he personally asked me, he said, told me, whatever, ordered me, empowered me, you should do relief work, he said. It was paining his heart that devotees who had come were going away. Do relief work. So preach to the devotees. Explain to them. I'll give you an example. He knew Achyutananda Maharaj. Some of you may know Achyutananda Maharaj, a godbrother of mine. Well, he was in India and preaching, and Prabhupada was an American. He wrote to Prabhupada, this was years ago, that he was in need of a Siksha Guru, and Prabhupada told him, go to my godbrother B.R. Srila Maharaj of Navadvip, what to speak of what you can learn from him. I consider him even my Siksha Guru. So history is there, and Achyutananda stayed for several months with Sridhar Maharaj. So Sridhar Maharaj knew him and liked him, and so on. Well, many, many years later, of course, after Prabhupada had left, he heard that Achyutananda Maharaj had written a book entitled Jewish something. was a played off of another popular book. I can't forget. Autobiography of a Jewish Yogi. You heard about Autobiography of a Yogi, right?
Yeah, right.
Autobiography of a Jewish Yogi. So he took it to mean that Achyutananda had become a Jewish yogi. And thought, Achyutananda become a Jewish yogi? I mean, he knows so much about Gaudiya Vaishnavism. He's Prabhupada's disciple. He lived here with me. We taught him. How could that be possible? Of course, that's not exactly what had happened. But he thought Gaudiya Vaishnavism was so rich. Nobody should go away. We should be able to, capture their mind, their intelligence, their heart by presenting it in such a way that there's this hackneyed thing. I want to go to class. I've been there. I heard it all. The class is for new people. The class is for new people. The class is not for new people.
I want to talk a little bit.
Boiling the milk. Exactly.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the relief work thing. In your experience, what has been the most inspiring thing for those who have kind of felt hackneyed or felt uninspired, and they become inspired somehow by either your association or how you speak or other devotees? In your experience, what has it been that has done that?
Well, I think that a good number of devotees who I've been able to help have kind of felt that the fountain, if you will, that they were drinking from it kind of dried up, and that they were hearing the same thing over and over again, and that's not so bad to hear the same thing over and over again. But if you can say the same thing, let's say, for example, you're not the body.
Yeah.
I mean, you've heard it, right? So someone would say, I don't need to go to that class. I heard that. That's for new people, that kind of thing. But to hear that, how about you are the body? I mean, I could make a strong philosophical case that you are the body. Inasmuch as, for example, the body that we have is configured out of the Maya Shakti, but it corresponds entirely with our own consciousness. Yam yam vyapi smaram bhavam chaditayante kalevaram. Right? The body that you get corresponds with your consciousness. It's your own idea. Things are ideas. I mean, ultimately, we're a kind of, idealists, not in the pure Berkeleyan sense, where there's no matter whatsoever, but matter is, potentialities that the objective observer brings into fruition or gives shape to, and so forth. So the body is our consciousness. We are conscious. I mean, I'm just making an argument. To talk about this in another way, this is just one way of doing it. Or you could talk about it in terms of that you're not the body, in terms of philosophy of mind, neuroscience, or something like that people are swayed by in the world today, and come up with very interesting, presentation about the subject that someone says, I already heard that. Yeah, I know that. That's for new people, and realize it's you haven't realized it yet, and there's a lot to be said there, and it's a very, very interesting subject. So what I found is, in one sense, talking about the same issues with more insight, using contemporary terms in relation to modern trends of philosophical thought and so forth, is compelling and nourishing compared to just repeating. I think you have to look at the just repeating, which is something Prabhupada sometimes emphasized, in a dynamic way. Let's give another example. Prabhupada used to taught us that the books were like law books, right?
Yes.
So you can't go to court as an attorney and say, Your Honor, I feel and I hope, and my heart's strongest desire is that my client is not guilty. When the other lawyer says, well, according to, such and such and such and such in 19 such and such and so forth, the law said this, and another date the law said this, and another date the law said this. Therefore, based on the circumstances now, I say he's guilty. Well, that lawyer is going to win the case, right?
Right.
So probably give the example. These books are like law books. Now, there's a couple ways that you think about that. First way to think about it is these are the law books. This is the law. Everything literally here, the whole world should be following everything literally. But if you follow that analogy out, you realize the law is continually being determined in an ongoing way with reference to previous precedents and so forth, then in relation to the new circumstances that we're dealing with now, right? So it's very dynamic when you play it out, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that kind of dynamic thinking is I have a little bit of that, and so I employ that, if you will, and it's been something that's devotees have found refreshing. But besides that, I think just the ability to, when I answer questions of a lot of students and friends and so forth, I answer them with questions. I get the answer as a question. So I try to get them to think about it themselves, which is they find very refreshing because they have come from a situation where they were led to believe, whether it was intentional or it was a mistake on their own part, they were led to believe, and they came to the conclusion that they weren't allowed to think. And they shouldn't even ask the question. They shouldn't even have any doubts. I say, doubt and come to me. Come, sit in front of me or stand above me as you like and doubt. And my business is to try to eradicate the doubts. You're supposed to have doubts, questions. Yeah. I'm supposed to answer them. I'm not supposed to say, don't ask that question, and then make you feel like you're offensive in the community, in the assembly or something like that. So for whatever it's worth, a number of persons, a good number of them, the majority of them, who feel nourished by me had developed that kind of thinking about Gaudiya Vaishnavism, that there was no license to think. Everything had been said. You think otherwise, you're offensive. And it's very, that kind of thinking is very different from what Prabhupada was actually like. So
he would accept doubts and address doubts, and
well, he used to ask me, what are the doubts? What are they saying? What are the people saying? And he would like to hear them, and then he would like to be able to reply and so forth. And I expressed doubts to Prabhupada about things that he wrote and so forth, and things that he did. Once I asked Prabhupada, I just do it innocently, but I said, you wrote in your book that the guru should not accept worship before the deity, but you accept worship before the deity. So how do we understand that? Wow. And then the Prabhupada's secretary said, "No, you're offensive." It was on a walk with Prabhupada, I think. I didn't think it was offensive. I just thought, well, here's my guru. I don't have anything wrong with it. I don't find a problem with it. I like it. I like the Guru Puja. I remember when it started, before we even were doing it, daily.
Yeah.
And I know the history of that too. It's very interesting. So, I think that we should encourage. Because if you don't encourage people to voice their doubts and bring them out and to think for themselves, this is not a black and white thing. Spiritual life, it's not like that. Love's not like that. Love's full of gray, full of gray. She loves me, she loves me not. You need to use your body, your mind, but you need to use your intelligence in Krishna consciousness also. It pains me to see that many of my god brothers and god sisters, in my humble estimation, are adults in every field. They have adult opinions anyway about any particular thing, but about Krishna consciousness, sometimes they have very childish opinions. They're afraid to be adults in relation to Krishna consciousness. And that's a disservice to their guru, to Prabhupada, because Prabhupada said at one point, my only shortcoming is that he said, my grandchildren are coming, but my children are not coming. What he meant by that is 20-year-olds like me were coming, but 50-year-olds who knew something about the world that Prabhupada was trying to figure out, the Western world, how they think, and so on and so forth, they weren't coming. And so now some of us are 50, 60, 70 years old. We should be using that maturity of experience and so forth, and adulthood, if you will, in having an adult way of looking at Krishna consciousness, rather than a very childish way of looking at Krishna consciousness, which is good when you're children, and you just yes, and so forth. And we see that in Prabhupada himself, how he dealt with his superiors and so forth, how he wrote differently in some commentaries than what was written previously, giving his own insight and so.
Did Prabhupada answer that question that you asked him on the morning walk?
He got cut off by the other devotee who criticized me.
Okay. Yeah, I love that point.
He said dilemma, something like that. He didn't take it up, but
yeah, a lot of gray in spiritual life. That's something I got that I understood. Padmanabha Swami talked about that too, a lot of gray in spiritual life. I appreciate that point a lot. For those of you listening, we're going to take questions pretty soon from Mara. So if you have a question, please put it in the comment section. Please keep it concise so we can post it up on the screen. But Marge, I wanted to talk a little bit about your more current books now. You wrote the Gopal Tipani Upanishad in early 2000, Shikshashtakam, Sacred Preface, and then recently now you're working on another book. Can we talk a little bit about those?
Yeah. The Gopal Tapani Upanishad commentary was something I did because I saw it as a sequel to the Ishopanishad, which Prabhupada did. The Ishopanishad is like the God Upanishad. Right. Gopal Tapani is the one about Gopal Tapani, which sheds light on Gopal, Krishna. And the Gopal mantra, that's the central mantra of our Diksha mantra, is revealed in that text and explained. So I thought that was would be a contribution to the community, and it's been well received. It's sold out. We're just getting ready to reprint it. And then I was busy with my mission for a while, didn't write, but the most recent book I wrote is entitled Sacred Preface, and it is an extensive commentary on the Mangalacharan of Chaitanya Charitamrita. Chaitanya Charitamrita has about 14 seed verses that the book expands from. Some of them are original verses of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, Sanskrit verses, and some of them are, a couple of them are attributed to Sri Damodar Goswami. And so the whole book expands from that. So I've written a commentary on that. I call it Sacred Preface because the preface is a modern way of speaking about a Mangalacharan. That's a very interesting book. I recommend it for thoughtful persons. It's highly philosophical and brings in a lot of contemporary insights, philosophical insights in the world, and interfaces them with core Gaudiya Vaishnava tenets. But more recently now, I'm writing a book. I finished writing a book. It's in the final stages of editing. It's quite a long book, quite a tome. I think it's over 30 chapters. And it's entitled Circle of Friends. So it is a book about the nature of Sakhyarasa, the history of Sakhyarasa in the Sampradaya is included in it. Wow. It's a book that, why did I write it? Some time ago, there was Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj was preaching widely that Prabhupada's ideal internally must have been Manjari Bhav. And I understand, why he said that, why he thought that. And it's very reasonable that he would come to that conclusion. But unfortunately, it was in a as reasonable of a conjecture as that was, or insight, spiritual insight. It is one that is not informed by many things that Prabhupada had said about himself, which is the ultimate pramana, if you will. You can come up with different reasons as to why a devotee's ideal might be this rasa or that rasa. That's what you find in books like Kavi Karnapur's Gorganadeshtipika. You find he's based on Puranic statements, based on opinions of other devotees, based on something the devotees themselves may have said, and there may be different opinions that he entertains. I mean, some think like this, something like that could be possible, this could be possible. It's not a like black and white book if you study it carefully when he says it at the onset of the text, how he came about, how he wrote it. So there are different ways that you might go about pursuing an answer to the question as to what this devotee's ideal is, swarup is, and so forth. But the ultimate pramana is what the devotee himself says. And I was aware of the fact that Prabhupada had said a number of things about himself. Maybe they didn't register with a lot of other devotees, but they registered with me. And so, seeing that this was being propagated, that Prabhupada's ideal was Manjari Bhav, I thought it would be a service to Prabhupada and to his disciples in particular and followers to bring forth the evidence with regard to such subject coming from himself. And so I gathered, together with the help of some friends and students, all the statements that Prabhupada made about his internal life, directly and indirectly.
Wow.
And it's an amazing amount of information. Some people say, disciples of Prabhupada say, Prabhupada didn't talk about that. Well, he talked about it quite a bit, actually. If you put it all together, it's quite a bit more than you can find has been voiced by contemporaries of himself, godbrothers, about their ideal and so forth. So having that information, I gave it to Bhakti Abai Ashram Maharaj. And I said, Maharaj, why don't you put this together in a coherent form as a little book? And so Maharaj took that up and presented it back to me. And then I looked it over and I added some insights to it, implications of what this would mean and so forth and so on. And so we have the book by Bhakti, by Ashram Maharaj, entitled "Oh My Friend," which is a phrase that Prabhupada used.
Right.
And it's interesting that the book was criticized without being read by some people as speculation about Prabhupada's rasa. And it's the antithesis of that, because it seeks to bring to light everything that Prabhupada himself said about his ideal, rather than speculate about it.
Right.
Or say that you can't think about it. Well, he did think about it, he did speak about it, and this is what he said, this is what the circumstances of the time, this is what the implications are, this is what the teaching says in relation to it, and so forth. So we put out that little book, and subsequently some friends and students of mine asked me to write something in greater detail about Sakhyarasa, because Sakhyarasa is something that has been eclipsed in the Gaudiya Sampradaya for some time. The history of the Sampradaya is such that it was founded in terms of being an institution of sorts, or let's say its early days of initiation, bringing people into the fold of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, this was under the care of Nityananda Prabhu. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu commissioned him, especially in West Bengal, to deliver the mercantile community in particular. And from within that group, the Dwadasa Gopals all appeared. All the 12 principal cowherd Sakhyarasa associates of Krishna and Balaram appearing in Gaur Lila all appeared in that, came under the care, I should say. They weren't all from the Vaishya community. Some of them were Brahmins, but they came under the care of Nityananda Prabhu. And they all, it's interesting because Nityananda Prabhu, of course, is Balaram. And in Krishna Lila, he can't directly participate as Balaram in Madhurya Rasa. But in Gaur Lila, he can directly participate in it by way of speaking about it, glorifying it openly. Balaram can't go around and say in Braj, look at the glories of the Parakya Rasa here, right? But in Gaur Lila, he can. So it's a great opportunity for him. And of course, he's a servant of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And therefore, Vrindavan Das says in Chaitanya Bhagavad that Nityananda Prabhu gave Gopi Bhav to the world. He gave it by giving the attention to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his gift. But he himself, of course, is steeped in Sakhyarasa. And so inevitably, some of the persons who followed him also developed this were attracted to that ideal.
Wow.
And this is the beginning of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. It's divided into the Mahants and the Gopals. The Mahants are a loosely group that's tied together only by the fact that they're not Gopals. The Gopals are all in Sakhyarasa. And so there were a number of lineages of Sakhyarasa. But at the time that Nityananda Prabhu disappeared and Janava, his consort, became prominent, the Goswami's books from Vrindavan were coming out with the emphasis on Madhurya Rasa and defining Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in terms of his internal reasons for descending and so on and so forth, which is prior to Chaitanya Charitamrita, but it's there embedded in the Goswami's writings. And so there was a wave then of interest in Madhurya Rasa, and even in the line, if you will, of Nityananda Prabhu coming from Janava. This is by this time, the Dwadasa Gopals are also passing away. So Madhurya Rasa, Manjari Bhav, became the prominent influence, and it is the prominent influence. It should be the prominent influence, but not at the cost of a supporting role of Sakhyarasa. But unfortunately, that became the case, and in the whole Sampradaya deteriorated in terms of having spiritual substance. Then we come to the time of Bhakti Vinod. Not many educated Hindus were very interested in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. It was thought to be, if you don't have a caste, you've lost your caste, you call yourself a Gaudiya Vaishnava and you think you've got praying. You've transcended the Dharma. We don't pay much attention to those people. So, and there you have the selling of swarups and so forth, more or less. It's going to become a business and so on. And so you even find in some of the Sakhyarasa lineages founded by Dwadasa Gopals, suddenly the Dwadasa Gopal also has a Manjari swarup, and you can also get Manjari Bhav here. I mean, it's and then you find Nityananda is also is tasting Radha Bhav. In fact, in some sects, he's equated with Radha. So these are unfortunate developments, and among other things, they serve to obscure the influence of Sakhyarasa. But in Prabhupada, you have this huge wave of Sakhyarasa. And it's very apparent from what he said, what he wrote in confidence, in his own personal diary, without desire to publish it and so forth. He expressed his sentiments. And many, the majority of Prabhupada's disciples felt affinity for this without thinking about it, for Sakhyarasa, without even thinking about it.
Wow.
You can't even find the word Manjari Bhav in Prabhupada's books anywhere. Not that he doesn't emphasize Gopi Bhav and that Gopi Bhav is the highest ideal. He did, appropriately, as Nityananda Prabhu did. But nonetheless, as many people were influenced by the Bhav of Nityananda Prabhu, so many by Prabhupada as well. You find afterwards, after Prabhupada's departure, when Pujapati Sridhar Maharaj or Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj, others came onto the scene by Krishna's arrangement, because the devotees needed nourishment. They weren't getting it from where they were previously, and they felt they needed more nourishment. They got it, and they learned about some of these ideas, and then they, under the tutelage of such Siksha gurus, some of them developed affinity for Madhurya Rasa. Some of us didn't. And we're grounded in what we perceive Prabhupada to be about internally. So there's a long history of Sakhyarasa, and I have detailed it in my book up to the present day. And well, the book is an interesting book. I mean, it's very personal in some places. I must say, it's confessional in some places, which is something that just happened to come out in the context of my enthusiasm of writing about the subject. It's entitled Circle of Friends, and so I was trying to think of a title where there would be divisions, but how do you divide friends? And I thought, well, circle has divisions. So it has circumference, it has a radius, it has a center. And so what I've done is I've taken the upper portion, if you will, of the circumference as the beginning section, which is about the tattva. So there I explained the tattva of relating to Sakhyarasa, including the means to attain it, as Raganuga Bhakti, Sambandhanuga Bhakti, and so forth. So I have 5-6 chapters about that, little terse but very interesting nonetheless. Philosophy and history that underlies Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And then the second part of the book is the radius. So we go from the circumference. What it is will include what it's not. I mean, what does it mean to love God as a friend? Well, there's a lot of things that it doesn't mean. And then there's things that it does mean that fall within the circle, right? So we're standing on the circumference and looking inward, and then we go inward to the radius. And there I have played out then what Sakhyarasa means by going over the chapters of the Bhagavatam that focus on Sakhyarasa. There are 3 basic centers, aesthetic centers of the Bhagavatam's 10th canto. You have a Vatsalya Rasa center, you have a Sakhyarasa center, and you have a Madhurya Rasa center. For example, the Madhurya Rasa, the Vatsalya Rasa center is the Damodar Leela and the chapters surrounding that. Then you have obviously the center of the center, if you will, the Madhurya Rasa center, the 5 chapters of the Rasa Leela. In between the two, you have emphasis on Sakhyarasa, beginning with the Brahma Vimohan Leela.
So it's not necessarily focusing on Prabhupada's swarup as in Sakhyarasa the same way that the previous book, Oh My Friend, was.
Yeah, the previous book, Oh My Friend, is focusing on Prabhupada's ideal of Sakhyarasa, not on the details of his inner life per se. This book isn't focusing on the inner details of Prabhupada either. It's focusing on the nature of Sakhyarasa. So I retold the Bhagavatam Leela, that's the Prakat Leela, with looking at it all from the point of Sakhyarasa, from that angle, writing about it. And that's something that hasn't been done.
Right.
So it's it's nice to have something that you can offer that hasn't been done, and that there's an audience for it. There are people that would be nourished by that. So to write about all those leelas, particularly from that angle, and then the last part is the center of the book. Well, that's not the last part, the third part, and that is looking at it from the aprakat leela to the unmanifest leela. So looking at the typical day in the life of Krishna, the eightfold divisions, and I'm looking at it from the Sakhyarasa vantage point, which has always been looked at from the Madhurya Rasa vantage point in Govinda Lilamrita or Krishna Bhavanamrita, Kavi Karnapur's similar text describing the Astaka Leela. That's something I asked Prabhupada. I'm the only person that ever asked Prabhupada that. What does it mean, Astaka Leela? Because he mentions it in Upadeshamrita.
Oh, wow.
I mean, interesting these subjects.
Interesting stuff.
So the last part, the third part is about I go through the eightfold daily Leela and look at it from the vantage point of a Narmasaka. So that means the Sakhyarasa that's influenced also by Madhurya Rasa. These are the most intimate friends of Krishna. And then the last part of the book is a few appendixes which serve as kind of the bottom half of the circumference of the circle, more tattva. So it's a pretty interesting book.
When is it slated to be released?
You tell me. It's in the last phases of editing, and I live in Northern California at my ashram called Adari with two other devotees who take care of me, and I help to take care of them. We have 5 cows and 1 peacock and 3 cats and 3 dogs there. So there's a lot to do,
Right.
It's 20 acres, and I keep pretty busy. In the morning, I rise and chant, and I clean up after the cow. It takes me about an hour cleaning up the cow dung, redoing their beds, and so forth.
Wow.
So I do that personally, and then I cook. Most of the time, I cook lunch for myself and the other devotees, and there's some cleaning to do. And then in the afternoons, I have time to sometimes rest a little bit and write and so forth, and on into the evening, and then I do the classes like this and so forth. So point being only that my personal circumstances are such that I got a lot of things to do, which are good for me, that besides the writing. So if I was just to focus only on that and the other 2 with me only on that, we'd probably get it a little earlier. But I hope for the end of the year.
Wait, wonderful. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's a good book. I mean, I think devotees will be surprised by it, and whatever their sentiment may be with regard to higher ideals, I think they'll find it to be nourishing.
Yeah, that gray again. It's not this and it's not that. There's a little bit of, we need to accommodate that. I appreciate that a lot.
Well, if you're going to talk about Sakhyarasa, you have to talk about Madhurya Rasa also. So
right.
Looking at it from that side, and it's unfortunate too, because these things have been presented sometimes as this is bad, this is good, Sakhyarasa is bad, Madhurya Rasa is good. Well, that nothing could be further from the truth if you in the Leela itself. So to see how they connect and how deeply and these 2 are particularly compatible, Sakhyarasa and Madhurya Rasa. They're friends amongst rasas. So there's something for everybody there.
Great. For our listeners, we'll be taking questions now. Maharaj, with your permission, we can take some questions from the comment section. Okay, let's see here. We'll start from the top. Maharaj Dandavat, we find that the loving propensity is present even in the animal kingdom. However, this propensity has been misdirected since time immemorial. If this propensity becomes directed towards the summum bonum, then does that constitute bhakti? And what is this distinction between this propensity itself and bhakti proper? Very I don't want you to spend too much time, Maharaj, because we have so much other questions, but if you could briefly maybe answer that. My apologies.
I think that all souls have a capacity to love, a propensity to love, a potential to love. There's no doubt about that. But if they don't hear about Krishna and the dissemination of the teachings about Krishna, that is bhakti. That's what we call sadhusanga. Then that they're going to repose their loving propensity in something that can't reciprocate in kind. That said, to be honest with you and thorough, yes, we have some loving propensity, and we find it even in the animal kingdom, but largely what's taking place within material life in all species is something that's under the influence of the Maya Shakti. So there's some sense of self-preservation that's involved, selfishness. And the Swarup Shakti of Krishna is working in a very different way, right? So I think that love, materially speaking, is not the same thing as bhakti. as loving Krishna. They're related, but they're different. So, but anyway, that aside, in a broader sense, without sadhusanga, we can't take up sadhana bhakti. Without sadhana bhakti, or mercy, with both, how will we attain prem bhakti? So it has to come from good association and so forth. Yes, we have the capacity to take it up. That's what tatasta means.
Right.
Tatasta means we could live on one side or we could live on the other side. We can live under the influence of Maya Shakti, or we can live under the influence of the Sarup Shakti. We're of a nature that lends itself to nurture, so that the environment, whether it be a Maya Shakti or Sarup Shakti environment, is going to be the nurturing factor. And but that doesn't mean we're not important. And what we have, in our constitution as an Atma, one of the things we have is will. So if you get the mercy of sadhu sangha, and as a result of that, you yourself take up bhakti, that sadhu sangha is an anga of, then having received that mercy, you're going to, in time, be able to apply your will in relation to that mercy, which is going to determine something about your ultimate attainment.
Wow. Right. Thank you.
In other words, Maya Shakti suppresses the will of the jiva. The Swarup Shakti facilitates it. That it can have whatever it wants, because under the influence of the Swarup Shakti, it will be pleasing to Krishna. You can't have whatever you want if it's not in relation to Krishna. In the Maya Shakti, you can't have whatever you want. In the spiritual world, you can have whatever you want, because the environment is all working only for the pleasure of Krishna. And it's a big subject, but
it is. Yeah.
I wouldn't say that means that bhakti is in you, that we have a propensity to love. That's included in the teaching that bhakti comes from sadhusanga rather than being inherent.
Right. Okay, thank you. From Charmaine O'Brien, can the path of impersonal liberation be a forerunner to realizing Krishna's ultimate supremacy, or are these distinctly separate realizations?
Well, we realize ourselves as an Atma being different from the body in the context of pursuing the ideal of praying. But there are paths that are distinct in that from bhakti, in that they are particularly focused on realizing the Atma and its likeness to Brahman. And those paths, the path of Gyan, the path of yoga, to some extent as well, Astanga yoga, these paths, they detachment, for example, in Gyan, is one of the angas, limbs of the path. Mumukshatva, longing for liberation, is central to Gyan Marg. And these things are counterproductive in relation to the path of bhakti. They will harden the heart, they will not soften the heart. So the path of Gyan is distinct from the path of Uttam Bhakti given by Rupa Goswami, and there are problems with it. I mean, there's not a problem with it. You can attain Sauja Mukti through Gyan and a little bit of Bhakti, but it's not that you apply yourself in that and be better suited then to pursue Bhakti. It's possible that, like Sukadev, you can be brought out of that, if you will, by good association, but that's more rare. And for that matter, as I said earlier, by pursuing Bhakti, you will not be without self-realization. That will come in the context of pursuing Bhakti.
Right. Thank you. Dandavats Gumaraj, 2 questions. What kind of help are you having with writing your books? And tell us about some recent book you read that you found inspiring.
What kind of help am I having? I'm not sure what the question is. I get help from my editors. But Mostly I get help from core Gaudiya Vaishnava texts and commentaries and so forth that I go deeply into and draw from them, cite them. I get inspiration of my own from them and cite that, and so forth. Recent books that I'm reading, I read different kinds of books, philosophical books mostly. And at the current time, because I've been absorbed in this book, I haven't been spending any time reading other books. But I found, I can't think of the name of it. There's two married couple, last name is Kelly. They wrote a book called um, Irreducible Mind. Hmm? Irreducible Mind. It's a very well thought out book dealing with the argument that consciousness is not the brain.
Okay. Can you please say something about founding the Harmonist website?
Well, yeah, we have a website called The Harmonist, and you can read what it's about on The Harmonist itself. Up there in the banner, I think I say something about us. There it is. And yeah, I started this quite a few years ago. I don't know, it must be at least more than 10 years ago. And I wanted to have a site that would have articles about Gaudiya Vaishnavism, as well as articles from contemporary thinkers in the world today on on contemporary spirituality and so forth. So it's kind of pluralistic in a way. While Gaudiya Vaishnavism is the core of it, all the articles are not written by Gaudiya Vaishnava authors, but by contemporary people who are making points, perhaps that we as Gaudiyas also largely agree with, or have some connection with, or their thoughts, points, arguments that we have thought about also, and landed a little differently on different feet about it, and so forth. So it's kind of meant to promote thoughtfulness amongst devotees about their own path, both by looking deeper into their own path through articles about Gaudiya Vaishnavism and about currents of thought in the world today that we could relate to. I mean, to me, it represents more of the time of Bhakti Vinod, for example. Bhakti Vinod was a luminary in his time, and he was known by secular authors. In fact, a secular author you can call him a secular author, but he was a religious man, but I forget his name, who dubbed Bhakti Vinod Thakur, who was a journalist, the seventh Goswami. So you could imagine during the time, if there were televisions and whatnot, Bhakti Vinod would have been on television about this or about that.
Right.
So I wanted to have a site where like Gaudiya Vaishnavism was part of the world, without compromising its core teachings, commenting about it, listening to other people, what they might say, and so forth. A lot of room for comments on there and so forth. It's an interesting site, Harmonist.
For those of you interested, harmonist.us is how to get there. Maybe someone can put it in the comment section, a link. Here's another question. Why did you write the Shikshashtakam?
Yeah, okay, that's a good one. I had given a series of lectures in Finland on Shikshashtakam, and some of the audience said, you should write this down. It was very nice. They liked it. So I thought about that, and I thought, let me do some research about Shikshashtakam and the various commentaries that have come out over the ages. And what I was surprised to find was there was a dearth of commentary on Shikshashtakam, which seems so central. What you find with regard to Shikshashtakam is that at the very end of Chaitanya Charitamrita, the Shikshashtakam verses are cited by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. He makes a few Bengali comments on them, passing from one to the next. And that's largely the main commentary on Shikshastakam. In more contemporary times, in more modern times, Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote a commentary on Shikshastakam. Later, the Anantadas Pandit wrote one as well, and they're different. But I couldn't find anything else out there, and I thought, well, there's room for more commentaries on Shikshastakam, and so that was the basis of it. And I wrote it was my favorite book at the time. It's very much about Gaur Leela, and it very much shows that basically that the end of Chaitanya Charitamrita is that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was successful. The last verse is the last verse of Shikshastakam, basically. And this verse, Kavirasa, was spoken by Radha. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was successful. So it's a very core, teaching, Shikshastakam. It's also written about, I should say, the Shikshastakam verses are there, cited by Rupa Goswami and Padyavali, but they're not put together as that one is leading to the next, to the next, to the next, which Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami did. And I liked that. He theologized a bit, to put them together like that. Rupa Goswami put them under different categories, along with other verses, some by known authors, some by unknown authors. But Krishnadas, this is, you were asking earlier, Namas, about new light, something new. So he took those Shikshastakam verses, right, showed that they'd be seen one after another, and he placed them in Mahaprabhu's mouth at the end of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, in the arms of Sarup Damodar and Ramananda Roy. I mean, that's very creative, and he demonstrated that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was successful in what he was trying to do. So I really enjoyed the writing the commentary, and that's the genesis of it.
Wonderful. How are you able to move forward while receiving criticism from others?
Well, criticism is good for you. We shouldn't be worried about that. If someone has some criticism, let them bring forward and listen to it. And if it has any, and we would try to find some value in it, even if it doesn't appear to have any on its face, some kernel of truth in it that we can improve from. Those who criticize us in ways that are inaccurate and don't have a kernel of truth to them, well, you could take their picture and put it on your altar and worship them for showing you how not to be.
Wow.
But if you know what you're doing and you're getting a taste from it, someone wants to criticize you, if you're living in it with a taste for bhakti, then it's like water off the duck's back or something like that. It can't deter you.
Thank you. What is your opinion of the gurus and babajis of the parivars?
Well, there are many parivars, so you can't really have a blanket statement about them. And I make my determinations about devotees or lineages based on what they say and what my experience of them is and so forth, rather than what might have been said 100 years ago, that you don't even know the whole history and it's been how much distorted by now. Who knows? I don't like to keep up old fights that maybe were valid at a certain time, a long time ago. It's very, very difficult to sort out the accurate histories of what was taking place in those times. It's impossible. So I think we have to be generous, accept that people are chanting, they're followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There's room for differences with regard to Abhideya Tattva, the means to get there. There may be differences in how to apply oneself. Take Rag Bhakti, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has written in Rag Bhakti Chandrika that details about that would be pertinent to internal practices of Raga Bhakti can be given by the guru or by a Siksha guru, or they may come simply from practice. Then he gives verses from Bhagavatam to support the latter. So you find an emphasis on the latter in terms of in the preaching of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and also from Bhakti Vinod. And you find an emphasis on the former in a number of paribars today, and both have could be applied properly or improperly in both situations. So I've seen in our own paribar, which Bhakti Siddhanta referred to as the Bhakti Vinod paribar, our group. He told his disciples when they were asked what paribar they're in, to say the Bhakti Vinod paribar. Typically, the paribars are thought to be originate in associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu during this time, but that's not always the case. We have the Shamananda paribar, we have the Narottam paribar, neither one of them met Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, for example. They're emphasized because of internal and external reasons, respectively. The internal insights of Shamananda and the wide preaching of Narottam compared to Lokanath, who had only one disciple, Narottam. So we don't call it the Lokanath paribar, we call it the Narottam paribar. So there's room for the Bhakti Vinod paribar. Prabhupada said, my movement is a movement of Bhakti Vinod. So there are problems with that paribar, lots of them. I'm a member of it, so, and Bhakti Vinod Thakur was, or Bhakti Siddhanta, following Bhakti Vinod Thakur's lead, was not shy to criticize Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which he was a member of. When he made a diorama of a Brahmin using a Shaligram Shila as a nutcracker, the implication of it was, you're worshiping the Shaligram, but only to fill your belly, really. Well, this was, a hue and a cry came from this, and he was taken to court over it. Bhakti Siddhanta, only in India, right? He was taken to court, and in the course of the rebuttal, the Brahmin side said, well, your Gaudiyas are also doing like that. He said, then put Gaudiya tilak on him, on the diorama. So he was ready to critique his own group. I think we should be ready to critique our own group and our own selves. We should spend a lot of time on that, and expect that we could find a better example elsewhere. Perhaps it's possible, and hopefully that would be the case. And if not, well, we have to know enough about Gaudiya Vaishnavism ourselves to be able to make that determination. This is not the teaching. This is not the philosophy. But then again, what you may think is not the philosophy. I mean, I went to some place, one Gaudiya Mat, and I was told I had the wrong color cloth, and my bead bag was the wrong color. If you think that's a Siddhanta, okay, well, I don't. So there are details that could be different in different places that don't necessarily make them bad, because they sing this song at that time rather than the one we sing at that time, and so forth. And then even in a deeper sense, the approach to the path, there's room for differences. There's room for different tastes, different ideals. We were talking about Sakhyarasa, Madhurya-rasa, and so forth. So I don't have any fixed opinion about everybody. I have opinion about people that I meet and that I hear from and that I have experience of. And I have a lot of experience of a lot of different types of Gaudiya Vaishnavas, and I have strong opinions about them all.
Right. Wow. Thank you. All right. We're coming to the almost the end of the time, but I want to take this last question from my friend Madan Gopal. You have surrounded yourself and your ashram by cows and Go-seva for many decades. Can you say something about what Go-seva brings to your practice and you're setting an example in this way? Very nice question.
Well, I started a few ashrams, and I originally thought I would try to get like 30 or 40 monks, 10 monks in each one, 10 or 15. Prabhupada once wanted to express a desire to have 25 sannyasis resident in Vrindavan at the Krishna Balaram Mandir, taking care of Krishna and Balaram.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, I have a whole different approach to a lot of things, but I established some ashrams that were rural, and I felt that was important. They're largely, self-sustaining. They grow food and whatnot. and so forth. And so cows, are part of that. But one of my thoughts at the time was that monks can need to be in touch with their humanity a little bit. As householders are more readily able to do that, taking care of kids and one another, dealing with sacrificing for one another's needs, which makes for a meaningful, rewarding relationship that you can grow through. So one of my original ideas was that by taking care of cows, the monks will be they're we say the cows are mothers, and they're true, but they're like children too. They require a lot of attention and so forth. So
Right.
I thought it was a nice way that they could remain a little grounded, little in their humanize them a little bit, I guess I want to say, so they don't get off thinking I'm living on a mountain, I'm enlightened, and I have nothing to do with the world, and Anyway, I didn't end up getting a whole bunch of monks. It wasn't in the cards that I have a reasonably nice group of helpers, advisors, and so forth, in the name of disciples and so on. But in our ashram Madhavan in Costa Rica, we have 150 of mountain jungle acres there. It's very, very beautiful.
Wow.
We have a nice Go-seva program there, and at Audaria in Northern California also. We have some cows in North Carolina also, where I go regularly. I'm going there just now in a few days, first time in a while since the pandemic, to give some lectures. And we want to connect with that series of talks. You're more than welcome. But yeah, cows, back to the cows. Cows are taking care of cows, scratching their necks and so forth, giving them fresh fodder. This is an anga of bhakti, according to Jiva Goswami in his commentary on Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So it's
Wow, I didn't know that.
yeah. There's a lot. It goes along with worshiping sacred trees and
Oh, I see.
and so forth. It's an extension of that, taking care of cows. So yeah, it's a very nice activity for the reasons I mentioned, and on top of it, it's an anga of bhakti. So
Right. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Maharaj, so much. I just want to ask you any parting words for our listeners regarding any of these topics, but maybe about authorship or about anything, actually.
well, read my books. If this particular interview is about me and authorship and books, you might want to read some of my books. They're from a very different place than most, if not all, books that have been written about Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Just my own individuality and so forth, and it has been rewarding for a lot of devotees. So I'm not a big marketer of them, but here's the pitch. If you read them, when I started to serve Prabhupada independently of ISKCON, my thought was to have a reading congregation. That was rather than a hands-on congregation telling people what to do with their lives and so forth, to create a reading congregation of thoughtful devotees and help to ground them intellectually in the Siddhanta, which would help them in their practice. So I'm still very interested in that. I'm not very outgoing in terms of canvassing and making disciples and so forth, but making a literary contribution, I think, is something I have a calling for. And my books are available on, as it said there on the screen, at darshanpress.com. So also, there's a website called Shabda Brahman, I think, maybe shabdabrahman.com or something like that. Where I have thousands and thousands of lectures there. It must be 3,000 lectures that on all kinds of Gaudiya topics and so forth that might be helpful for those who are interested. But otherwise, advice, I think that it's good for devotees to try to express their realizations, and I think Prabhupada supports me on that, and that in trying to do so, that they should grow. Talking about, writing about your realizations will solidify what you've heard. when the same thing that when you're speaking about something to others, if you're paying attention to what you're saying, you're going to hear in your own words what you need to hear yourself more when you hear it from someone else speaking. When it's coming from you and you're telling it to somebody else, and I'm not quite doing that myself, but I should be, or it's good for you. So according to your realization, I think it's good. It's a pity that you can go to a bookstore and you can find hundreds of books on Buddhism, many of them written by householders or persons who aren't living a monastic lifestyle, and you can't find that about Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So I would encourage devotees to try to express themselves and learn from that.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Maharaj, for again joining me. Really appreciate it. Maybe we bring you on again after your Circle of Friends book comes out. That would be really nice to kind of discuss that whole topic. Would be really nice. And for all of us, for all of the listeners, next week we have another interesting episode. Garuda Prabhu and Bashu Ghosh Prabhu contacted me. They said, we want to come on and talk about Vaishnavi Diksha gurus, pro and con. And I said, as long as you all are friendly with each other, then let's do it. So they said, yeah, we're going to have a friendly conversation about it. So let's see how that goes. That's going to be nice next week, next Saturday. And then we have on Sunday, Amar Prabhu from Germany is going to be joining me talking about his life. He's a very interesting devotee. So we have that coming up. Well, thank you again, Maharaj, for joining me. And thank you, everyone, for listening. If you want to contact Maharaj, there's probably a lot of links in the comments where you can find his website for his books and his personal website, swami-tripurari.com. And you can get in touch with him there. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Have a great rest of your evening. Maharaj, please stay on after I turn off the live. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.